Headlines: Korea's rival political parties meet victims' families of the April ferry disaster, but their latest attempt to break a political impasse over a bill that's been blocking all legislative action for weeks failed as the talks broke down. Consumer sentiment picks up in August on the back of anticipation over the government's stimulus measures, although it's still hit below the pre-ferry disaster level. And an open-ended ceasefire between Israel and the Palestinians aimed at ending their 7-week conflict takes hold in Gaza. The focus now shifts to securing an arrangement for the long term.
Welcome to Primetime News, live from Seoul. I'm Sean Lim.
And I'm Kang Chery. Thanks for joining us tonight. We begin with Korea's consumer sentiment for the month of August. It actually picked up on anticipation over the Korean government's stimulus measures that the government recently announced.
However, we still have a ways to go before we actually reach levels that are before the April ferry disaster. And with more, here's our Kang Chery with this report.
The Korean government's efforts to shore up economic sentiment are bearing fruit. The Bank of Korea says the consumer sentiment index stood at 107 in August, up 2 points from a month earlier. The figure marks a rebound from July, suggesting that Korean consumers might be returning to their spending habits that were dented after April's ferry disaster. The index hovered at around the 108 level in the first 4 months of this year, but dropped to 105 in May following the disaster. The central bank says the improvement was spurred by a widely expected rate cut this month and government stimulus measures that were instituted by Finance Minister Choi You-sun's new economic team. While indications are that consumer sentiment is improving, the August figure is still below the level posted before the ferry tragedy.
A new survey we conducted shows that more than half of the firms surveyed expect the negative impact of the ferry tragedy to last through next month. Those who think it will last for more than 2 or 3 months made up more than 30%.
The monthly index is a gauge of the overall economic outlook of consumers, their living conditions, and future spending plans. A reading over 100 means optimists outnumber pessimists. Although the economy is not running in full steam for now, expectations are high that there will be a pickup in private spending with one of the nation's biggest holidays, Chuseok, right around the corner. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
And a chronic obstacle facing Korean society is its rapidly aging population. To tackle concerns that the state-run public pension may not be enough to support the senior population at some point, the Korean government will obligate all companies in the country to offer their employees private retirement plans in 8 years' time. By 2016, all companies with 300 or more employees would be required to do this. And by 2022, the provisions would extend to all companies regardless of size.
The match between the nation's top messaging app and Korea's #2 web portal is complete. Daum Kakao will officially launch on October 1st. So what will this new entity do with its newfound power? It has a domestic rival to fight, but as our Kwon So-hwa tells us, the main battle may be on the global market.
The deal is sealed. The merger of Daum Communications, Korea's second-largest internet portal, and Kakao Corporation, the nation's #1 mobile messaging service, was approved by all associated shareholders on Wednesday. It comes 3 months after the two companies announced the merger through a stock swap arrangement. Daum Kakao will officially launch on October 1st and is expected to be co-led by Kakao CEO Lee Se-gu and Daum CEO Choi Se-hun. At the shareholders' meeting Wednesday, Lee said he hoped the new company would not only have a reach in the domestic IT market, but also in the global market. The merger is expected to impact Korea's top search engine provider, Naver, and its messaging service Line, which as of now have a much bigger global user base compared to Kakao's messenger service, KakaoTalk. Daum Kakao says the new company's services will not only be restricted to the online world, but that it will expand into a platform that can be used in everyday life. The market capital of the new company could rise to over 10 trillion won or nearly $10 billion as Daum's current value is $2.2 billion and Kakao's is at around $9 billion. Industry watchers therefore expect Daum Kakao to eventually become the most valued company on the tech-heavy Kosdaq stock exchange. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
And in more tech news, Chinese manufacturers have recently been loosening Korea's tight grip on the smartphone market, but apparently they're encroaching into other sectors too. Research firm Display Search says 3 Chinese television manufacturers, including Xiaomi and Lenovo, recently released products at extremely low prices, some up to 30% cheaper than similar ones on the market. Xiaomi, for example, is selling a 49-inch ultra-high-definition TV for around $650 US. That's about 4 times lower than similar class models offered by Korea's tech giant Samsung.
And here's an update on Korea's political deadlock. Another failed round of talks between the ruling party here in Korea and victims' families of the April ferry disaster.
The two sides did promise to meet again to hash out their differences, but how many more meetings will it take? Our Choi You-sun has this report.
Tensions had certainly waned compared to their first meeting 2 days earlier.
Tell us anything you'd like. We will faithfully listen.
Compensation is not very important to all the families. What's truly important is one thing, and that is finding the truth behind the accident.
But after 3 long hours of talks on Wednesday, the ruling party and the families of victims from April's ferry disaster only managed to reconfirm their differences over a contested bill on probing the accident. The families reiterated their demand for a group of legal experts that they select have authority to investigate and indict. The Saenuri party, on the other hand, said it would violate the judicial system. After talks failed, the ruling party floor leader Lee Wan-gu said he feels mutual understanding is growing. The family representative, however, said no progress was made since the previous meeting and that they will meet again next Monday. Meanwhile, the opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy, whose proposal for a 3-way negotiation with the ruling party and the families was rejected earlier this week, continued rallying at Gwanghwamun Square for a second day. If the ruling party is thinking about what's best for the people, it must resolve the Seoul ferry bill within this week. Political discord over the ferry bill has paralyzed parliamentary affairs, delaying passage of major economy and reform-related bills. President Park Geun-hye and the ruling party have urged the opposition to prioritize the pending bills, but as more time passes, the prolonged logjam will likely become a bigger burden for the ruling side. Choi You-sun, Arirang News.
American intelligence agencies reportedly have grave suspicions that North Korea is developing a submarine capable of launching ballistic missiles. Our Shin Se-min has the details.
You're looking at North Korean leader Kim Jong-un sitting atop of a Romeo-class submarine. The photos of Kim surfaced in June when he visited a naval unit of the Korean People's Army and, according to North Korean state media, conducted a drill and instructed the captain on navigation methods. His visit is part of North Korea's efforts to shore up the underwater operation capability of its submarines. And it seems the North is making inroads. U.S.-based media outlet Washington Free Beacon reports that U.S. Defense Intelligence agencies recently detected a previously unseen missile launch tube on a North Korean submarine. North Korea is reportedly developing a ballistic missile submarine that, if confirmed to be true, would significantly raise the threat posed by the nuclear-armed communist state. According to the report, U.S. intelligence shows Pyongyang is developing a submarine capable of launching ballistic missiles. North Korea is also believed to have already obtained submarine-launched ballistic missiles from Russia. Pentagon spokesman Jeffrey Poole refused to comment on the report, saying he was not allowed to discuss matters of national intelligence. However, he did say the U.S. urges Pyongyang to be more transparent with its defense activities for the sake of regional peace. If the report is true and Pyongyang has developed its capability, the U.S. will have to look into strengthening its missile defense systems on the West Coast, as North Korea would be capable of hitting Alaska. U.S. bases in Japan, the Philippines, and Guam would also be well within range of a North Korean strike launch from waters in Asia. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Here's an open call for all you tech entrepreneurs out there. Google will debut a new platform for startup companies in Seoul next year. The internet company said what will be called Campus Seoul will represent its first such venue in Asia. The community will provide support to entrepreneurs and also offer mentorships while providing opportunities for businesses to expand overseas and attract investments. Google says the support comes with no strings attached. Once it's established, the Google campus in Korea will be the world's third. The first one launched in London in 2012, followed by another in Israel later that year. Well, if you live here in Korea, have you noticed how expensive a cup of coffee has become?
I hear on average it's $4 to $5 a cup. That's about twice the cost of the same coffee in the U.S. That's not fair.
Right, and if you factor in that average incomes in Korea are about half of those in the state, that's a very hefty price indeed to pay for a cup of joe.
You know what? There is demand out there for coffee here in Korea. I'm not a coffee drinker myself, so I don't really get this, but you will see, you're bound to see at least one or two coffee shops within one block in Seoul, or even more, and there's a high chance that it's a Starbucks, actually.
Right, and the firm announced its first price hike in 2 years in July, and that raised a lot of eyebrows and also questions of whether it would dampen sales. How high can this coffee price go? Well, our Connie Kim has this report on how the coffee chain is doing here in Korea.
Look around, and it won't be too hard to find a place to grab a cup of coffee. But none have quite the presence that Starbucks has. Just across the street from where I'm standing is another Starbucks that's quite as busy as this one. Actually, there are so many in Seoul, 284 Starbucks coffee shops in the capital city. Now that's more than you'll find in New York City, Shanghai, London, or Seattle, where the company was founded. So why are customers finding their way to a Starbucks?
There are many items on the menu and a lot of Starbucks stores. They are easy to find, so that's why I continue coming.
I like the brand image, and the stores are clean compared to other coffee shops.
But enjoying the company's fresh brewed coffee comes with a higher price. Customers are paying a premium for a cup of joe at Starbucks stores in Korea, on average $4.85. That's nearly twice the amount customers pay in the United States. For an Americano, the data shows that Korea ranks 6th on the price list, behind countries like Poland and Greece. As for the expensive markup for the same coffee drinks, Starbucks Korea declined to comment to Arirang News. But according to Korean daily 동아일보, Starbucks Korea says different operating costs and cultural factors are the reasons, and that using numbers may not be the best way to draw comparisons. But do they justify higher prices? Well, perhaps. When compared with other domestic coffee chains in the country, Starbucks prices are on par with those found at domestic coffee chains. It appears that Koreans, generally speaking, are willing to shell out a little extra for a cup of coffee, no matter where it comes from. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
The latest discovery of nearly 80 Buddhist artifacts on the outskirts of Seoul was revealed to the public last week. They're among some of the finest preserved and historically important pieces related to Northeast Asian Buddhism. Our Song Ji-sun has this story.
At the entrance of a trail leading to summit of Dobongsan Mountain in northern Seoul sits Dobong-seowon. During Korea's Joseon dynasty, which spanned more than 500 years until the late 19th century, Dobong-seowon acted as an institute for educating young scholars and remembering historic ones. This particular institute was dedicated to Jo Gwang-jo, a Confucian scholar who pursued radical reforms in the early 16th century. But recent discoveries at the site have people, historians in particular, looking even further back to the Goryeo dynasty, which ruled most of the Korean peninsula between the 10th and 14th century. A total of 77 Buddhist artifacts from the Goryeo era have been discovered here at Dobong Sewon, a site that functioned as a Confucian academy during the Joseon dynasty. The site, currently being restored, is set to be reopened next year. Among the dozens of artifacts excavated, one very sophisticated piece that's unique to the Goryeo era stands out. It's this Kumgangnyeong, a bell used in Buddhist ceremonies during prayer chants. It's the first known piece in which the 4 heavenly guardians and the 5 great kings are engraved on one instrument, a first not just in Korea, but in other Northeast Asian countries where Buddhism has roots. Although these artifacts were found at an institute that was used during the Joseon dynasty, at a time when Buddhism was suppressed to foster Confucianism, they were not hidden or destroyed.
Before transforming into an institute, the site was used as a temple in the Goryeo era. It is assumed that these artifacts were buried as part of a ceremony to pay respect to the Buddha. These were found inside these larger pots, which helped to preserve their original shapes and materials relatively well.
The preliminary report on these artifacts will now be handed over to art historians, who will conduct further studies and look for clues about Buddhist practices during the Goryeo era. 송지선, Arirang News.
After some 8 ceasefire deals in a 50-day war, Israel and Hamas have agreed on an indefinite truce. And let me add, this is just after more than 2,000 people, mostly civilians, have been killed in this violence.
And with more, we turn to Paul Yi at the News Center. Paul, what are some of the conditions for this extended ceasefire?
Well, the Egyptian-backed deal will allow Palestinians to start rebuilding, as well as partially lift the 8-year blockade of Gaza. The long-term ceasefire that took effect on Tuesday appears to be holding as both sides prepare to return to Cairo to work out a permanent peace plan. Our Son Jung-in has this report.
The long-term truce was announced Tuesday after Israel and Hamas agreed to halt fighting indefinitely, bringing an end to 7 weeks of conflict. The truce brokered by the Egyptian government was reached after 2 days of extensive negotiations in Cairo. The terms of the deal appeared to be almost the same as the one proffered at the beginning of the conflict, easing the blockage of Gaza to allow relief supplies and reconstruction materials to pass through. It also extends the fishing limit to 6 nautical miles from 3 nautical miles. Joyful Palestinians poured into the streets to celebrate. However, fighting continued right up until the truce was declared, with 1 Israeli killed and several injured, according to its officials, while in Gaza, 2 Palestinian children were reportedly killed in an airstrike. Both sides will likely return to Cairo sometime within the next month to address more contentious issues, including Israel's call for militant groups to disarm and Hamas' demands for an airport and seaport in Gaza and the release of Palestinian prisoners. The ceasefire follows at least 8 temporary truces during the course of the conflict that began on July 8th. More than 2,200 people were killed and tens of thousands were left homeless, mostly in Gaza. Son Jung-in, Arirang News.
And in another welcome development, Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin have vowed to bring peace to the war-torn region in eastern Ukraine. The announcement on Wednesday came after both leaders sat down for talks in Belarus, which are part of wider negotiations with European officials aimed at ending the crisis. Poroshenko said all leaders had agreed to support an urgent ceasefire plan to defuse the conflict between the rebels and government forces. He added that consultations would soon begin on forming a trilateral contact group, one that would be made in cooperation with European security monitors. Despite the positive tone, it remains unclear how the pro-Russian separatists will respond to the peace plan as fighting continues in the east of the country. And finally, the World Health Organization has called for stricter measures on electronic cigarettes, warning they could pose a serious health threat. The WHO on Tuesday cited a lack of research to determine if the rapidly growing vaping trend is less harmful than conventional tobacco products. And it's this gray area that has prompted the UN Health Agency to call on countries to ban the sale of e-cigarettes to minors. Our Kim Min-ji has the details.
More and more people these days are reaching for electronic cigarettes as a way to quit smoking.
If you use electric cigarettes, you will smoke less tobacco.
Although potentially less harmful than traditional cigarettes, there are mounting concerns regarding the health risks of e-cigarettes. And the World Health Organization has drawn up a report calling for stricter regulations. It calls for the prohibition on e-cigarette manufacturers from making unproven health claims, such as they help people quit smoking, until there is convincing scientific evidence to support them. The WHO also urges a ban on the use of e-cigarettes in public places until it is proven that exhaled vapor is not harmful to bystanders. The report also says fruit candy or alcoholic drink-style flavors should be prohibited until evidence shows that they're not attractive to teenagers. The report warned that exhaled e-cigarette vapor could increase the levels of toxins and nicotine in the background air and pose a greater threat to teenagers and the fetuses of pregnant women who use the device.
Underlying reasons for regulation are really to impede then the promotion of these products to non-smokers and youth.
The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention released a separate report saying that teenagers that have used e-cigarettes were more likely to smoke real cigarettes. The WHO will hold the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control in October and discuss the issue with member states. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
And that wraps up our look at international stories making headlines around the world. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Hello and welcome to sports. Let's kick off with football as South Korea continues its search for a new national team manager. The Korea Football Association says it's come down to just a handful. KFA Technical Committee Chief Lee Young-soo said that 4 to 5 candidates fit their stringent standards, adding that the one chosen would have to, quote, dedicate himself to South Korean football with passion. Now they're hoping to make their final choice within September after their friendlies against Venezuela and Uruguay on the 5th and 8th next month. And shifting to AFC Champions League action. It's the quarterfinal second leg meeting between FC Seoul and the Pohang Steelers after their 0-0 draw last week. Now there are 2 Korean teams left in the competition and only one could advance. It's a 7:30 p.m. kickoff at Seoul World Cup Stadium with thousands in attendance. In the first half, the teams are neck and neck with Seoul playing the counterattack and Pohang pressing the home team's back line, but it ends with the scores level. Now it's more of the same in the second half as the time winds down and it heads to extra time where it stays tied 0-0. Now it heads to penalty shootout where FC Seoul outscores Pohang 3-0 and they advance to the semis for the second year in a row. Now more action in the capital city, but this time baseball. It's the Seoul rivals, the LG Twins and the Tusan Bears in the Chamsir Derby. Now we have LG's Ryu Jae-guk, who's taking on Tusan's No Kyung-eun. We go to the first inning, Lee Jin-young, and then Lee Byung-gyu bring runners home. LG's up 2-0. The Bears starter No, he struggles and comes off after LG's Oh Ji-won hits one in. He lasts just 1 1/3 innings. Now we have his replacement, Chung Dae-hyun. He holds it until the 4th when a balk costs him a run. LG goes up 5-0. We have LG starter Ryu Jae-guk. He throws a jab. It's a 3-hitter with 6 strikeouts. And in the end, LG holds on to win this one over Tusan 5-1. And looking at the other games, Nexon takes down Kia 6-4. Hanwha wins over NC 7-3. Meanwhile, Lotte beats Samsung 11-4. Now getting to tennis, round 1 of the U.S. Open wrapped up on the second day of play with some familiar names moving on, as well as a huge upset. Roger Federer, largely regarded as the favorite, took down his opponent in 3 sets, while top-ranked Serena Williams also booked her ticket to round 2 with ease. But the story of the day was American teenager Cici Bellis, who stunned everyone with her win over 12-seed Dominika Cibulkova. And with that, the 15-year-old became the youngest to win a U.S. Open match since 1996, about 3 years before she was born. And that wraps it up for sports. This has been Stephen Che. The weather is up next.
Hello everyone, I'm Kim Bo-kyung with your weather updates. It's breezy here in Seoul, but down south, cities are getting drenched. A heavy rainfall watch has been issued for Jeju, where sporadic showers continue. But it's not only the island, but both Jeollado provinces are also receiving showers. So through tomorrow, up to 80 millimeters is forecast for Jeju, where 5 to 30 millimeters is in store for other southern regions. Rains will taper off by tomorrow afternoon. Now, overall, Thursday is shaping up to be cloudy for most parts of the country. Otherwise, a heads up for those of you in Jeju, as heavy precipitation of more than 30 millimeters per hour, this accompanied by strong winds and thunder, is in store for Friday. On to Thursday's readings. Seoul hits 31, while cities down south hover around 26. On to other places. Jeju peaks at 24, Dokdo and Mount Kumgang hit the mid-20s. That does it for me for now, but don't forget to tune in for more updates after midnight. See you then.
All right, thanks, Po-kyung. And that's Primetime News for this Wednesday. I'm Sean Lim.
And I'm Kang Chery. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.